This is Political Thursday on Full Service Radio, 830 WCRN. Now, here's your host, Gerry Dougherty.
Tax the rich, feed the poor, tell there are no rich no more.
Good morning, New England, and welcome to Political Thursday, the interchange between politics, the economy, your pocketbook, and of course, the condition of the country that we're going to be leaving to our children, kind of that legacy planning, as they call it in financial terms. So legacy planning, what are you going to be doing with the condition of the country that we're going to be leaving for our children? Pretty important stuff. So Political Thursday is heard right here on WCRN every Thursday from 10 to 11 in the morning. And I want to talk a little bit this morning about tax revenues and what's going on with the tax picture at not only the federal level, but at most state levels as well. You know, it's very interesting. In economics, there's a well-known economist by the name of Art Laffer. And he is probably most famous for decades ago putting together what is called the Laffer curve. So if you go to Investopedia or any other investment source, you'll see that there's a thing called the Laffer curve. And basically, the Laffer curve is a theory that looks at tax rates relative to tax revenues. And as you raise tax rates, tax revenues actually go down. So in this morning's program, a little bit later on, I want to talk about that because right now the coffers for federal and state taxes are really through the roof, in large part due to the Laffer curve. So stay with me for that. I'm going to talk about that in segment 2 and segment number 3. But joining us, as she always does, for segment number 1 on this morning's program is Holly Robichard. You know Holly. Holly, welcome back to the program.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, Holly. How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Good. Are you wearing a mask on an airplane still, or?
Well, I might, okay, but that's just me. I don't think I should be telling anybody else what to do. But, my business, there's a lot of flying, and I always seem to get next to somebody that has a cold and end up with having a cold, either going on vacation or having to do presentations. So I might still wear a mask just to, for myself, but I don't think I should be telling anybody else what to do. So.
Right. Well, I agree with you 100%. And
I'm not one of these crazy people that wears it out in the street or in stores. It's just like, I don't know, for some reason, every time I get on a plane, there's always somebody sick next to me. So. Right.
Well, that seems to be sometimes traveling like that. It is a little bit of Murphy's Law, that you do actually pick the wrong seat. And I think that's the way that it should have always been, by the way, with this mask stuff. Is that if you want to wear your mask, go ahead and wear your mask. More power to you. Nobody's stopping you from wearing your mask. But just don't force me to wear a mask during public transportation. Holly, I was very happy to see that Florida judge, the young Florida judge, a Trump appointee, strike this thing down, at least for the moment. And we'll see what the CDC and what the government decides to do in response to this thing. But I think what is your thought, Holly, on COVID itself? Are we really pulling out of this thing? Have Americans pretty much had enough at this point in time?
Yeah, I don't think that if they tried to do another lockdown, people are going to buy it. So I just think that people are going to be like, yeah, forget it. So they've had enough, and they've seen that all the lockdowns, all the measures that they took did not work.
Right. They did not work at all.
Yeah.
They really haven't. It doesn't really do much to fight this thing at all. Holly, I feel the pendulum swinging at the federal level, and I can see this a little bit reflected even in some of the more liberal media outlets. Their criticism of President Biden really seems to be growing in these poll numbers. Whether it is mask mandates, whether it's handling of Ukraine, whether it's the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan, or this runaway inflation that we have right now. The Biden administration, am I wrong in that the whole thing really seems to be collapsing on virtually every single front?
Yeah, I mean, who are the 33 that still like him? Right? I mean, when you go out and talk to people, who's saying, "Oh, Biden, he's doing such a good job"? Nobody thinks that. People are scared right now. They're afraid of a recession that's going to come. They don't like that interest rates are going up on homes. They don't like that we're paying so much more at the gas station. I mean, yesterday I saw something at $3.84. I was like, "Whoa, look at that!" And then I'm grateful for $3.84 when under Trump we were back down to like $1.75.
I know.
And then you go out food shopping or you go to a restaurant. Went out to a restaurant last weekend, and get a cup of lobster bisque, a cup, not a bowl, $12.
Wow.
$12. I don't blame the restaurant, which Biden would do. I look at the cost, right? I mean, to go get the lobster, the diesel fuel for the boat's a lot more money. To transport the lobster, to keep the lobster, in the water, a lot more money. So it's costing everybody more and more money, and it's going to cause a recession. So tell me, who are the 33 people that like this? The 33%? I don't.
Yeah, I think what it is, I think it's a lot of the, very wealthy and kind of the, the special people who are out there who never adhered. It's like Obama's, birthday party that he had. These people, they don't adhere to the mask mandates. They have never done that. They kind of live in their own world. They live in their little bubble, if you will. And those are the 33% of people who are supporting him, these really diehard Democrats who are going to vote because they don't seem to be affected by this. I think it's that, and then people who are beholden, for their jobs to the Democrat establishment. That's it. It's the stronghold. It's not the person who's on Main Street. And I agree with you, Holly, 100% about some of these restaurants and the other businesses as well. Not only is that cup of lobster bisque $12, but you can bet your bottom dollar that cup is a little bit smaller also than it was a while ago. The portioning in the restaurants has come down. A lot of these restaurants are serving smaller portions to keep their prices stabilized. That's what they're doing. Or if they're raising prices, then it's the same portion that they were serving before. But where all this
or
is
are they
headed,
putting stickers over their pricing on their menus, or they're doing the paper menus where they have to reprint it every week. It's really, I feel bad and it's sad. And yet, where's the mainstream media going after this guy? Because it is all his fault, whether it's the supply chain or the cost of oil. I mean, he's done all, in his foreign policy. I mean, it's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare, and he caused it.
He did. This is the world of Joe Biden, and this is the problem when you have a president who literally is or presidential candidate who's in his basement during the entire campaign, and you don't have a national media who's drilling down on that, putting any scrutiny on this guy. Anybody who did put scrutiny on him, and there were certain networks that did, like Fox, for example, and Fox Business and so on, they did ask a lot of these hard questions about Joe Biden, his competency, and also what these policies, more important, are leading to. It was Barack Obama who famously said that elections have consequences. Well, it's also policies, and I think that's the more important aspect of this, policies that have consequences. And everybody knew what Joe Biden's policies were. Some of the media brought them to light, but a lot of them didn't. They just didn't bring them to light. They were so hell-bent on this anti-Donald Trump, narrative that they wanted to go out there. Joe Biden, from the beginning, was talking about these policies, Holly. And now these policies are coming to their fruition. And we're seeing the results of them. And it's totally a mess. So, Holly, we have the midterm elections that, are roughly 6 or 7 months away. That looks like it's going to be a red tidal wave. What, in addition, though, to the midterm elections, do you think is some of the salvation to getting out of this thing alive?
Well, we've got to win in November, and and right now Republicans are polling much further ahead than Democrats. But how do we take another 2 years of the Biden administration and executive orders? This would be, one of those teachable moments. I've always, whether it's Republican or Democrat, opposed executive orders. I understand that sometimes you need to do them, but they have become a way of life, and it becomes that the presidency has become a little bit more of a dictatorship than a check and balance to Congress, and it bothers me. And so, even if we win a Republican Congress, we still have to deal with Joe Biden in the executive orders, unless the Republican Congress has the guts to impeach Biden. And he has done some very worthy things of impeachment, such as Afghanistan. Now, whether you could then turn around and relate that to Kamala Harris to get her out of office, I don't know, and put a Republican in there. So, right now, it is an embarrassment on an international stage that Joe Biden couldn't hold a press conference with the Prime Minister of Great Britain, couldn't hold a press conference with Putin. They've all sized him up. I think we're just lucky right now that China has not invaded Taiwan. Then you send Kamala Harris overseas, and she can't pronounce things. She doesn't know basically where she is. She's no better than he is. I wish we had a recall, because I believe there would be a major effort to recall Joe Biden. Obviously, then it would become a political weapon. But we've got to have some kind of recourse. I don't know. Maybe the secretaries, the cabinet members call for his removal. I don't know. It's what a disaster.
It's a total disaster. So I think one of the things that will help beyond the midterm elections, Holly, I think one of our saving graces might be the all of the judges that were appointed under Donald Trump, at the federal level and so on. Because with some of these executive orders, it seems like, on a consistent basis now, a lot of them being challenged through the courts, whether Joe Biden has the right to do some of these executive orders. And maybe that'll be part of the salvation from this thing. Holly, my biggest fear with the Biden administration, for these next couple of years, and I guess more in the immediate term, is I just sense from people that I see on the news, and including what Joe Biden himself has said, but some of these, closer inner circle of Joe Biden, it looks like, this guy is actually considering putting U.S. troops, or at least NATO troops, being in support of this in Ukraine. What's your feel on that? This really could lead to World War III.
That would be a disaster. Yeah. And what he'll say is we're going to tell them not to shoot, right? We sent them over to Europe and told them not to participate. What was the point of sending them there? Okay, if we send the troops into Ukraine, it could end up a huge problem. Look, we should be more concerned with our southern border than the border of Ukraine. There are still sanctions and financial things that they could do, that the president could do, to bankrupt Russia and cut off their money supply. And that's what he needs to take. He doesn't need to jeopardize one American life, not one.
Holly, that's well stated. And I think that the vast majority of Americans agree with you on that. Not one American life in Ukraine. This is an important issue. But Holly, thank you so much for joining us. As you know, we're up against that new clock where the computer's going to take over in just about 20 seconds or so. It's going to cut me off and you. But Holly,
have a great weekend.
You too. I look forward to speaking to you next week. Thank you very much. That's Holly Robichaud. We're going to take a short time out. You're listening to Political Thursday here on WCRN. And when I come back, I want to pick up on a few things that Holly spoke about, as well as talk about some of these tax revenues that are coming in right now, and in our economy in general. You're listening to Gerry Dougherty on Political Thursday. You can chime in at 508-871-7000. I'll be right back.
96 elephants are killed every day in Africa for their ivory. That's 35,000 a year. With your support, more poachers can be caught. With your voice, we can inspire more countries to ban ivory sales and reduce demand. Go to 96elephants.org and join more than 1 million people dedicated to saving Africa's elephants. Protect their home. Take action at 96elephants.org.
Expert Agents Realty is a family-owned real estate firm with offices in 2 locations, Northborough and East Longmeadow. For 25 years, Mark Toomey, the owner-broker of Expert Agents Realty, has focused on providing buyer and seller clients the highest level of service in the industry. A licensed real estate broker, Mark has sold hundreds and hundreds of properties for clients in the Metro West and Worcester County areas, specializing in residential sales, single-family condominiums, multifamily homes, and land. Working with all types of buyers and sellers, including first-time buyers, retirees, investors, and builders. Being a full-service broker means handling every aspect of the buying and selling process, working with a team of local lenders, attorneys, and other industry professionals to help ensure a smooth buying and selling process. Call Mark today at 508-393-3383 and put the power of experience to work for you in your search for a new home.
WCRN gets results on radio.
It is Frankie Boyer. I am so grateful that I get to do this show, and you couldn't find a better partner than WCRN.
WCRN gets results on radio. Call 508-870-5803, extension 222. That's 508-870-5803, extension 222. Or visit WCRNradio.com.
Now, Political Thursday continues on Full Service Radio, 830 WCRN. Once again, here's your host, Gerry Dougherty.
Welcome back, and thanks for staying with us on Political Thursday. Well, I remember a few years ago in 2012, looking at that election between the federal election for president between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. And I remember that famous debate where they were asked, what is the number one geopolitical threat to the United States? And Mitt Romney said that it still is Russia. Now, I do think that China is probably the number one geopolitical threat to the United States. But I have to tell you, there are many geopolitical threats. And I think that Mitt Romney's answer when he said Russia was really important. And Barack Obama, of course, in a really condescending way, really an insulting, very condescending way, just kind of body slammed Mitt Romney. And for TV, it made for great theatrics. It really did. It was great TV watching that. But of course, Barack Obama was completely wrong in his assessment, and this is proved to be true. All these years later, although we did see, with the invasion of Georgia, Crimea, we've seen, Russia consistently prove Barack Obama wrong. But really now today, with this invasion of Ukraine, it's really come to a really graphic conclusion. Much more graphic conclusion that we watch on TV every single night. And then I also remember a few years ago, not that many years ago, watching, President Trump sitting with the European Union members and specifically chastising Germany and saying to them, that you European Union members, the EU, need to be very careful about getting into bed so far with countries like Russia, so dependent for their oil and for natural gas. And that's for two reasons. Number one, it creates that dependency for the European Union economies in that they're now dependent upon their energy resource from Russia. But number two, they're also providing the funding mechanism for Russia, buying their oil, buying natural gas from Russia, that allows Vladimir Putin to go off on this major military adventurism that he seems to be so prone to do. And it is very interesting because when you do look back at the price of oil, it seems that every time oil gets to be $100 a barrel or more, whether it's the invasion of Georgia or whether it's, Crimea, you look at that, that's when Vladimir Putin seems to make his moves. And right now it seems to be happening again with Ukraine. There is definitely a relationship between oil prices and Vladimir Putin making military moves. That's pretty indisputable. If you look at any chart, they can show you that. So this whole thing is something that was somewhat predictable. And it was also something that the Democrat administrations, whether it's Barack Obama or whether it's President Biden, the current president, that their administrations have many times just dismissed, that they seem to know better than what many voices have warned them from. And that's what's gotten us into this crisis right now. And what I fear, I'm talking to Holly Robichaud a little bit about this, what I fear is that now President Biden and a few of his major supporters in Congress, they seem to be indicating, you have to kind of read a little bit between the lines, but they seem to be indicating that committing U.S. troops to this Ukraine situation is not completely off the table. Even though they have said that he's not going to commit U.S. troops earlier, now they seem to be looking at this thing with a little bit of a different agenda. And it's very concerning. So we also have the European Union, who is trying to get off Russian oil and Russian energy. And they're meeting to discuss a complete embargo. We've had these sanctions that have been put into place so far. But the sanctions themselves, as much as they have been kind of severe, they're really only wounds. There's nothing that's too fatal about the sanctions. The major sanction would be a complete, cessation, a complete mandate that says that that the European Union is not going to use Russian oil or Russian energy. It's roughly 40% of Russia's economy comes from oil revenues. So, let's call it half of the economy is driven by oil. So it's a really big piece of it. And until you have a complete cessation of Russian oil flowing into the European Union, then these sanctions that they put into place are not that great. It's interesting, too, when you look at it, with Iran a few years ago, we already have one model to look at with this. With Iran a few years ago, the United States did say that we're going to give you a little bit of runway of time here. If you're dependent upon Iranian oil, we're going to give you a runway of time of a year or two before we're going to put in these really crippling sanctions. But now in Ukraine, we don't really have the ability to do that. The clock has kind of run out. We can't say to people, we're going to give you 2 years to the European Union before you need to wean yourself off of the Russian oil. But it is a worldwide oil market, as you know. It is possible for the European Union to find other sources of oil other than just Russia. The other side of that coin, of course, is that Russia also can continue to sell their oil to other countries around the world, because it is a worldwide oil market. Nobody has a corner on that market, and Russia is a major league producer. So we're going to have to see what happens there. But until this becomes a lot more, until the European Union becomes a lot more firm in their commitment to not buy Russian oil, I don't think that these sanctions are going to be any type of deterrent whatsoever, and they haven't been so far to Vladimir Putin. So if you'd like to join the conversation, you can at 508-871-7000, especially if you have a different solution to this whole thing. But we are hoping that, President Biden does not escalate America's involvement in Ukraine. I have a hard time, too, really seeing at the end of the day, I understand that we'd like to see Ukraine as an independent country, but how it's really in our national interest to get into World War III over the situation in Ukraine. I don't really see that as the American interest. I know our producer, Joe Mangiacotti, wants to chime in here. Joe, you wanted to make a point?
Oh, no, I was just agreeing. World War III is of nobody's interest. It won't serve any purpose. And they're getting he's getting $1 billion a day in revenue. He can fight forever on $1 billion. You know what I'm saying? How can the only solution here is to cut off the sale of oil or the purchasing of oil from Russia. That's the only way to cripple him. The only time he behaved himself was when oil was under $80 a barrel.
Yeah. So we have, and this is really kind of a two-edged sword, we have a lot of U.S. exports. As you know, we had as most people probably saw in the news, last week was the biggest export week for energy here in the United States for oil exports. And a lot of that's going to Europe right now, in hopes that it will get them off of the Russian oil. But it's very hard when you abruptly, it's almost like a heroin addict in a way. That's what it's, that's almost what it's analogous to, is saying to a heroin addict, just simply go cold turkey. Now, the reality is that we have a worldwide oil market. But when you look at where we're getting the oil from, the United States, to send over to Europe, we're taking a lot of this oil out of our strategic petroleum reserves. So the strategic petroleum reserves now under the Biden administration have dropped by about 10%. And that puts us in a weaker situation.
Absolutely.
Should something really dire happen to happen, which is the which is the whole point of having these strategic petroleum reserves. They're an energy rainy day fund.
This is truly a situation that Joe Biden, it would have been better off if he literally did nothing when he became president. If he had just left everything the way it was, from the border policy to the energy policy, and continue being the mass energy exporter that we were under the Trump administration. These, Germany, France, they could have easily gotten it from us. We would have done very well. Plus, our producers of oil do very well at $80 a barrel, extremely well, and the system would work very well. We could take up the responsibility of providing energy to those European nations. They wouldn't have to count on Russia at all. It's literally a situation of do nothing would have been the best thing. If he'd done nothing, his poll numbers would be great right now, because people would forget and they would think the great economy, low gas prices, secure border, they would think it's all Biden doing it. He could have just leave it alone.
But he didn't. He didn't. The reality is that he got involved because he wants to show that, as he was billed by a lot of his handlers, that he has more foreign policy expertise than anybody else, and that we're now going to put the adults back in the room. How absurd is this?
How insulting is that?
It's completely absurd, though. These people who have been wrong, like Joe Biden, on virtually every single foreign policy issue in the past 50 years, that they're the adults who are returning to the room. So you know what? They will return to the room. However that happened, whether he actually was returned to the room by the American people or whether it was a rigged election, as Molly Hemingway lays out in her book, he did return to the room. And now you look at this disaster that we are in, and you can just go right down the list, from Afghanistan all the way leading up to Ukraine, to our economy, to our southern border, all of these different disasters that are festering right now. And what can we do about it other than the midterm elections that are 6 or 7 months away, and other than relying on a strong, court system, these federal judges? I think, the legal system, the judiciary is one of our saving graces to get us number 1, 2, the midterm elections, and then beyond that. And let's not forget too, Joe, these midterm elections, we say it's 6 or 7 months away, that the cavalry's, on its way. That's not really true, because, people are going to get elected in November, but they're not taking office until January. This is still quite a runway away, and there's a lot of damage that can be done, as you know, in a almost a year-long period of time that we're coming up.
Look how much has been done in a year. I mean, you know what I'm saying? So it's going to be a tough 6 months ahead of us, and a lot of damage can be done.
A lot of damage can be done. All right. Well, I'm going to take a short time out. You're listening to Gerry Dougherty on Political Thursday right here on WCRN. And if you'd like to join the conversation, you can at 508-871-7000, especially if you disagree.
$1 in false billings and theft from COVID assistance programs. They say some of those charged offered COVID testing to get people to give up their personal identification information and a saliva or blood sample, which were used to submit fake claims to Medicare for unnecessary expensive tests or services.
Dr. Tanya J. Powers, America's listening to Fox News.
Mrs. Fogelman, ready to hustle for that muscle.
Membership numbers at Sly's Gym have been racking up.
22 people have signed up for 6 a.m. buns of steel.
Now he needs more certified trainers to do all the heavy lifting.
I'm going to have to bulk up my staff.
Indeed can help him hire great people fast.
I need Indeed.
Indeed, you do. Our hiring platform instantly connects you with quality candidates whose resumes on Indeed match your job description. Visit Indeed.com/credit and get $75 towards your first sponsored job. Terms and conditions apply.
Straight Talk Wireless now has the new iPhone 13 with cinematic mode, which lets you focus on what matters. And with Straight Talk, you can focus on getting the best deal. Our Silver Unlimited plan is just $45 a month for unlimited talk, text, and data. And it runs on the largest, most dependable networks, now with nationwide 5G. With the iPhone 13 on Straight Talk, you can share whatever you want, wherever you want. Straight Talk Wireless. 5G capable device required. Actual availability, coverage, and speed may vary. See terms and conditions at straighttalk.com.
Time now for the forecast from the Boston Independence Group Weather Center. Call Gerry Dougherty today at 877-772-1776. Retirement is within reach.
I'm meteorologist Gerry Spear, and here's the latest Boston 25 weather on Radio 830 WCRN. We've got some increasing clouds happening this afternoon, so do expect a partly to even mostly cloudy turn. Now, high temperatures today are probably going to be close to 60 degrees, but keep in mind there will be some increasing winds, so gusts 20 to 30 miles per hour will make it at times feel a little bit cooler. We're also watching this evening for a quick passing shower. I'm meteorologist Gerry Spear, and you can hear Boston.
Hi, this is Gerry Dougherty from Making Money Last. If you think the economy is doing well, I've got even more good news. Making Money Last will now be heard right here on WCRN 5 days a week, Monday through Friday from 11 to noon. So be sure to tune in.
Music all night, news and talk all day on Full Service Radio, AM 830 WCRN.
You're listening to Political Thursday on Full Service Radio 830 WCRN. Once again, here's your host, Gerry Dougherty.
Tax the rich, feed the poor, tell there are no rich no more.
Welcome back, and thanks for staying with us. Well, no truer words have been written in music than tax the rich, feed the poor, till there are no rich no more. So what about all this taxation? Does all of this taxation really work? Can you really just tax people endlessly? Or is there an end point in this thing? You know, where do you draw the line? Can you just keep on taxing people? Well, in economics, there's a pretty well-known economist by the name of Art Laffer. You see Art Laffer on TV a lot. I've been a fan of Art Laffer's literally for decades. And Art Laffer put together this thing decades ago called the Laffer curve, which essentially just describes the relationship between tax rates, kind of increasing tax rates, and the total amount of tax revenue that you get. So there's going to come a point in time where you tax people and it doesn't become a disincentive for them to work. They continue to work just as hard as they always did. But then eventually, when they're taxed too much, it becomes a disincentive and they decide to just stay at home. They don't want to work anymore because they're giving up all their revenue to taxes. So you look at this. I once read an interesting article that, remember the old Beatles song, Tax Man? Well, George Harrison, he wrote that in the late 1960s. I think it was maybe 1966 or 67. I think that appeared on their Revolver album. And the reason that he wrote that song is because he learned at that point in time in England the tax rates on the wealthy, and the Beatles in the late 1960s, as you might imagine, were making a pile of money. Tax rates on the wealthy in England at that point in time were 90%. 90%. So can you imagine giving up 90% of your income? And when Art Laffer thinks about that, there's a concept called behavioral economics, and it's just your behavior when things like that happen. And if somebody taxes you at 90%, your behavior is going to say, what's the point in me getting out of bed and going to work? It becomes a disincentive for you to work. But then if you back off from the 90% number and you start to think about this, well, what if I were taxed at 70%? Some of you may say, well, I'll still get out of bed and go to work, but I'm going to do it somewhat reluctantly. But what if we backed off to say 30%? Then you might say, well, if I'm keeping 70% of my money, giving up 30% to the government, maybe I'll be aware of what's going on, but, maybe I'll still go to work. But then if you get down to 10% or so, you might say, well, that sounds like a fair arrangement. Giving up 10% of my income, I'm keeping 90%. I'm definitely going to work with a lot of enthusiasm to keep 90% of my revenue, because I do understand the government needs to take some amount of money from us. So that's essentially behavioral economics, and that's essentially what Art Laffer talks about. If you raise tax rates, you get kind of a range of outcomes. And at some point in time, when you raise the rates enough, it's going to become a disincentive for people to continue to work. So what's going to happen with all of that? That's obvious, right? But what's the byproduct of all of that? If people have a disincentive to work and they stop working, tax revenues go down. That's what happens. So you actually, if you raise tax rates enough, as a lot of Democrats want to do, they might, in their minds, think it's logical that they're going to increase tax revenues. But that's not what happens, because it becomes a disincentive for people to work, where people start cheating on their tax returns. People start using tax schemes to get around paying taxes and so on. So tax revenues actually go down. So yesterday, the reason I'm bringing this up is in the Wall Street Journal, yesterday being Wednesday, April 20th, there was an opinion piece, and there's been a lot of articles on this, but there was an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal, page 816, and it's titled, Corporate Tax Reform Worked. Corporate tax reform worked. And what they write in this article is they talk about the 2017 tax reform cuts, remember, in Jobs Act. And the reason it was called the Jobs Act as well, Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, is because as you cut corporate tax rates, it's going to let businesses hold on to more of their money, which allows them to expand and open up more factories and, of course, hire more people. So there was a tax, cut, but also Jobs Act. And as they write in this article, they say reform has been a winner for the economy and for federal tax coffers. There's been more money that's been collected by federal coffers than almost ever before. So reading directly from this, I want to read the the second paragraph of this. It says, remember the claims that during the 2017 tax debate that this reform would drain the Treasury. In other words, it would have a negative impact, especially the cut in the corporate income tax rate from 21% to 21% from 35%. So the United States prior to 2017, we were at a 35% corporate tax rate, giving up more than 1/3 of corporate tax revenues. The Trump administration cut that all the way down to 21%. And back then, as this article points out, corporate revenue was supposed to fall to historic lows. That's what many of the people who were criticizing this said would happen. But now, as we look back, that didn't happen. In fact, it hasn't turned out that way at all. Remember, there's always a lag time in this stuff. So initially, when corporate revenues were cut, Joe, do you want to?
I was just going to say, when the Trump administration did lower it to 21%,
yeah,
that also resulted in billions of dollars coming back into the country.
It did. I'm going to talk about that in 1 minute.
All right, sorry.
I'm going to talk about that's no. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. That's another byproduct. But the point I want to make is that initially in 2017 into 2018, we saw corporate revenues fall. That's because there's always a lag time between putting an action into place and seeing the results of that new policy that you put into place. It's kind of the same argument that I make right now with the Federal Reserve, that the Biden administration thinks that there's a straight line between Federal Reserve action and getting inflation under control. It's not how it works. There's always a lag time. First, the economy has to slow down. Second, we have to have unemployment go up after the economy slows down. And then lagging behind that, inflation will get under control. This is kind of the same process, but reverse engineered. In 2017, we lowered tax rates. So initially, we didn't see federal coffers swelling with new tax revenues because it had to kind of work through the system. The corporations had to take that new revenue, build more factories, hire more people, and then what you see, that you have more factories, greater tax base, more taxpayers, and so on. Then you start to see the federal revenues go up, and that's kind of what we're seeing here. There's always a lag time. So as they write in this article a little bit further, they put down it. It hasn't turned out that way. That this thing was a disaster. In fact, corporate tax revenues, they declined during the immediate wake of the reform as tax rates fell. But the big news today is that more corporate tax revenue is flowing into the Treasury at record levels, even with these lower rates. So lower tax rates have gone to higher revenues. It's very important to understand that that's the way that this thing works. They talk about the tax revenues that the Congressional Budget Office had predicted would happen and what's actually happening today. So, for example, in 2021, the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, they estimated that after 2017 tax cuts, tax reform, in 2021, we'd collect $327 billion in revenue. And what actually happened due to these tax cuts is we collected $372 billion. So instead of $327 billion, $372 billion. That's a pretty big increase. And I hope you have your seatbelt fastened for this next number, because for 2022 so far, and I know we're only through March so far in 2022, just in the later part of April here. So we only have numbers through March. The CBO estimated that in 2022, that because of the Trump tax cuts in 2017, that they'd collect $353 billion. Well, right now we're on track through March to collect $454 billion, more than $100 billion more. So it's pretty indisputable that these tax cuts actually work, and that we don't want to be raising, as the Biden administration says, taxes right now, because that would be a disincentive, and it would throw us back into a very non-competitive situation with the rest of the world if we raise corporate tax rates. Now, to Joe's point, Joe, this is exactly what you brought up. Another thing is this repatriation of overseas earnings, bringing those back into the U.S., because you have a lot of these countries, especially Ireland, right? Ireland has these crazy low tax rates. You have a lot of these companies that are domiciled in Ireland to take advantage of Irish tax laws, and they don't pay U.S. income taxes. Well, the Trump administration recognized that, and they said, we want to repatriate a lot of these corporate dollars. So has that worked? Now that we've seen the effects of this, a few years have passed since the 2017 tax reform, companies have brought back almost $2 trillion, 1.8 trillion, almost $2 trillion since the 2017 tax reform, $2 trillion with a T dollars. So it's pretty amazing. The repatriation, by the way, when you look at this, of overseas earnings, they express this in terms of a percent of GDP, okay? So of our gross domestic product. And I don't want to get too mired in these numbers, but I have to tell you, these numbers are very, very important, I think, for people to truly understand. And the repatriation of overseas earnings has amounted to about 2.4%, almost 2.5% of GDP from 2018 through 2021. Now that's versus, under the Obama administration, 1% from 2014 through 2017. So if you really want to drive economic prosperity, if you really want to drive your pocketbook, tax rates are really, really important. So is energy policy, as you all know. We're seeing the effects of the poor, the misguided energy policy of the Obama administration. And now, on top of that, you saw President Biden a couple of weeks ago talk about this new tax, proposal that he wants to put out there that's raising corporate rates, these greedy corporations and so on. But in the real world, it doesn't work that way. Higher tax rates become a disincentive. I'm going to take a short time out. You're listening to Gerry Dougherty on Political Thursday. You can chime in at 508-871-7000. I'll be right back.
Spring is in the air, and it's full speed ahead for your Worcester Red Sox. And tickets are on sale now. Enjoy unique bobbleheads, Unibank fireworks, and and magical moments for your family on the field. Visit BlueSox.com or call 508-500-8888. No worries at Fuller Park. We'll see you opening day, April 12th.
93% of adults listen to the radio each week. Of those exposed to radio ads, over half made a purchase. Despite how often the media reports on newer forms of advertising, it is, in fact, free broadcast radio that most effectively reaches and truly influences customers. Radio allows you to place your company's message directly to the radio audience for 30 or 60 seconds, and it's a gold mine. Radio advertisements are more memorable compared to written and visual ads. It's just this simple. Sound is stored more effectively inside memories. Reach over 90% of this market's potential customers with your radio message on WCRN Full Service Radio. Call station manager Chris Thompson at 508-870-5803 extension 222 or visit WCRNradio.com.
There's no better way to celebrate beautiful weather than cruising the great outdoors. Hi, I'm Paul Kowalas, president of Linders. We offer the area's largest selection of late model, certified pre-owned vehicles, most still under factory warranty.
Like a 2019 Infiniti QX50 Pure with only 15,000 miles for just $37,995.
Celebrate the arrival of spring with a quality pre-owned vehicle from Linders on Granite Street in Worcester. Linders.com.
Linders, the intelligent alternative.
Now, Political Thursday continues on Full Service Radio, 830 WCRN. Once again, here's your host, Gerry Dougherty.
Tax the rich, feed the poor, tell their old rich no more.
Welcome back to Political Thursday, the interchange between politics, the economy, big issue, your pocketbook, bigger issue, and of course, the condition of the country we're going to leave for our children. So when you look at some of these tax rates, as we were just talking about this, more you raise tax rates, the more there is a disincentive for people to work. The more there is a disincentive for corporations to open up new factories when you look at corporate tax rates and so on. So these are big issues. So if you really want to raise federal revenues, if you want to increase federal revenues, the best thing that you can do is find a kind of equilibrium, that neutral point where tax rates don't become a disincentive. You have everybody working and you have people working as hard as they want to work without feeling that they're giving up too much of their revenue. Now, one thing I wanted to mention, just to kind of finish up that topic, is I did want to mention beyond corporate taxes that we were just talking about. Now, corporate taxes have really gone up. There's been a lot of repatriation of the corporate dollars coming into the federal coffers as well. The individual income tax revenue rose by about $300 billion last year, or 36% for the fiscal year, through March, when you compare that to the same period in 2021. So this seems to be working not only on the corporate side, but also on the individual side, where we have these tax rates just about, it seems, where they should be. It's not an exact science, so we have to kind of figure this thing out. But that behavioral economics is, as plain as the nose on your face. That the reality is that if you take too much of somebody's money away from them, it's going to become a disincentive. We all understand in this dangerous world that we live in how important it is to to have federal tax revenues for our Army and for other federal responsibilities, roadways and all this and all of that, but not to the point where it's a disincentive. So I want to shift gears for the few minutes that we have remaining here. I want to talk a little bit about the southern border, and I know, Joe, you wanted to join me on this conversation as well on the southern border. Let's remember that when President Biden first came into office, he kind of immediately and abruptly stopped construction on the border wall. Remember the wall? It now seems like just a distant memory.
Yeah.
How we're actually putting this, pretty sophisticated, pretty effective wall on the southern border in certain areas that it was, pretty easy for people to cross. We wanted to block that. There are other areas of the southern border that aren't so easy for people to cross. There are natural barriers. It's just very difficult to get through some of this terrain. But in the areas that were a little bit easier, the Biden administration, through an executive order on his first day in office, to show you where his priority is, this is one of the very first things he did, is he stopped construction of the wall along the border with Mexico on our southern border. So kind of misplaced. And since then, we've had a whole, fiasco that's developed down there. We had the Vice President, Kamala Harris, who was put in charge of the southern border. She was supposed to be the border czar. And now more recently, we have, this Title 42 that's, no longer going to be enforced, which is really a public health mandate. So, you still have to wear masks on airplanes. You do, right? But we don't have people who we can't get out of the country who we suspect have, either COVID or, some other god-awful disease. So, Joe, these numbers are just swelling right at the southern border, and they create all sorts of problems for Americans.
Oh, they do. They do. And it was a spiteful move, right? Day one, like you said, executive order. For no other reason that Trump had gotten the border under the best control and secure as it's been in decades, and left millions of dollars worth of fencing and equipment rotting in the desert. The Governor Abbott of Texas said, okay, let us buy, meaning the state of Texas will buy it, and we will finish what is, because it's the largest front in the southern border, we'll complete the fence. Biden administration said no, they wouldn't sell it to Texas, wouldn't sell it to the governor. So it was just a spiteful thing that they were doing there. But there's another part of all this, as good and sophisticated as the wall is, and all of the sensors that go with it underground as well, and infrared cameras, it's all incorporated in the system. It's the messaging too. The fact that when you have a secure border and a fence, and which kills me now, is you have these Democrats standing down there saying, maybe we need a physical deterrent. Like a wall, you mean? As a physical deterrent? Was that what you mean there, Senator? So it's the messaging, because you listen to some of the interviews, these impromptu interviews that are being done on the border, and those crossing, Gerry, is saying, no, we wouldn't have tried to come when Trump was in. That guy's crazy. We don't know what he'd do. No. So the messaging is as important as the quality of the wall and the policies, because this 42, May 23rd, I think, is the target date, right, to lift it. The cartels and the coyotes have just scheduled. They're basically the border travel agency, right?
Right, and that's really the main thing. It's all of these other, items, all these other problems that creep up. This is not an immigration problem, right? And these are not refugees. Let's be honest about this. These are people who, my heart goes out to them, but they're just simply seeking a better life here in the United States.
Except for those 43 people on the terrorists.
Except for the 43 people. We're catching some terrorists and all that stuff. But also when you look at things like the drugs that are coming across the border, I mean, it's not publicized enough. No. There are more young people who died from opioids, far more. It's a multiple of the number of people who have died from opioids that have died from COVID-19.
Yeah, it's like 18 to 42. Number one death is fentanyl poisoning. And I don't know how much
type of opioid poison. Yeah, and a lot of these are not intentional, overdoses. It's that they didn't understand how strong some of these pills were that they're taking. That's coming from the southern border.
I maintain that we should stop calling them overdoses, and they are poisonings. Because if you buy something, and let's not get into the morality of you buying a drug. You buy a drug which you think and you understand to be one drug that has been laced with something else. If I laced your diabetic insulin with poison, I'd be charged with murder.
Right.
And so these aren't overdoses. They aren't overdosing. They are taking something that's been laced with fentanyl, a lethal dose. Therefore, they have been poisoned. And the media needs to start calling it what it is, as far as I'm concerned.
Right. And bring that to light.
Yeah.
because, on top of that, we have all sorts of crime problems. And on top of that, we have all sorts of getaways. Joe, you mentioned these 42 or whatever it is terrorists who have been captured. Those are the ones who have been captured.
Exactly.
There are a whole bunch of other people who made it in here successfully who are now living among us, and that's obviously a really big problem.
In that wave of people coming over that aren't trying to get away, Gerry, right? They're coming over. They're seeking out the Border Patrol. They're being helped through the water and down, and we've turned our Border Patrol agents into a processing center. Well, that number at 180,000 a month type of thing, 18,000 a day, is so large and overwhelming that creates the diversion for the ones the cartels do want to get over undetected. So here's a couple thousand people coming over in the Rio Grande here, and the Border Patrol just doesn't have the manpower and the bodies to be able to watch everything and respond to everything at one time. So don't think it's by accident these getaways are getting away. It's a diversion, and they just flood the border with those, and they go get those people are actually trying to have a better life. They're not, I'm not worried. I think that for the border immigration reform, it has to be secure the border, number one. Second is streamline the process, create some kind of ability. If they can come up with $3,000 or $4,000 per family member to pay a coyote, they can buy a plane ticket, fly into the United States, go to the center. And by the way, Burlington, Massachusetts is the center, and this is kept quiet, is the center that receives more illegal immigrants than any other of the centers the Biden administration has set up, right here in Massachusetts, by the way. So let them fly to the country right above board, and we know who they are, right? That's the other thing is when they come over, Gerry, we know who they are and what their background is.
And the economic impact of this, Joe. I mean, this is, I think, what sometimes gets lost on people because it sounds so, compassionate to say that we're going to take these people into the country and we're going to help them and everything else. But we do have a process. We take in more people in the United States than any other country in the world legally, roughly 1 million people a year who come into the country. When you look at the economic impact of this, would you rather have this going on? Would you rather have safer roads or better schools or maybe more programs for American citizens, people who are already here? I mean, none of this stuff happens in a vacuum. It's all related. If we spend money over here, it means we have less money to spend over there. That's the way that this thing works. But with this misguided immigration policy right now, and all of the fringe problems, crime problems that result from this, potentially terrorist problems that result from this, and certainly opioid problems that result from this. Looking at these death rates, especially of young people, it's just a tragedy that's going on. Clearly, in order to be a nation, a sovereign nation, we have to have borders to this country. It's the very argument that's being made right now in Ukraine, that we're there, to support Ukraine with their borders. Well, I think a lot of this stuff starts at home. We should be starting with our own borders first. So, anyway, Joe, thanks for chiming in on that. I know that's an important topic.
Yeah.
And we are out of time for this week's Political Thursday already.
It flies.
That's a quick hour.
It flies. It really is.
It really flies by. So hopefully you'll join us next week. Thank you for joining us this week. You're listening to Gerry Dougherty, and I'll be right back behind this microphone in about 2 or 3 minutes for my retirement planning program called Making Money Last, America's Retirement Resource. I'll be right back.
Joe, I'm going to run out real fast.
You've been listening to Political Thursday on Full Service Radio, 830 WCRN.